Good afternoon, everyone. Carousel Technology and ServiceNow would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow Federal Tech Talk, Low-Code Application Development Governance on ServiceNow. Joining us today, we have Chris Gear, Technical Director of Creator Workflows for ServiceNow, and Daniel Bowling, Senior Solution Consultant of Creator Workflows for ServiceNow. At this time, I would like to turn it over to our first speaker. Chris, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay. My name is Chris Gear, and I'm here with Daniel Bowling, and we are part of our Federal Creator Workflows team. And today we're going to talk a lot about low-code application development governance. I know in the past we've done a lot of conversations and some webinars around how to build applications on the ServiceNow platform. And today we're really going to be taking that to the next step, which is how do we scale that and be able to provide some governance around the low-code application development process on the platform. So first off, from a safe harbor perspective, we may talk about roadmap items today. If we do talk about roadmap items, we will call it out and be very clear about that. We will do that, and just so you're aware that that may come up today. Is everybody to hear us okay? All right. So I want to start off and really talk about, hey, why are we looking at low-code application governance? And really it's because we're looking at the world a little bit differently today than we have in the past, right? It's how do we deliver applications in a different way than we have in the past? How do we achieve speed, efficiency, and experience? How do we deliver things quickly? How do we provide our employees and our customers with more efficient experiences? And how do we provide a good experience for everyone to be able to use these applications? And what are we looking for? And this is what we get asked for a lot from a lot of our customers if we're talking with a lot of the leadership is about, hey, how do we do that? But how do we do it by empowering more technologists? Our traditional software development organizations aren't scaling at the pace that they need to keep up with the demand for mission and business applications that are needed. How do we modernize core systems without ripping and replacing them? How do we wrap a new layer around them so that we can achieve value and we can provide more capability without getting rid of those core systems? And then also, how do we do this all at scale? And this is where we're really going to focus today, which is we have low-code tools to build applications. We can do that quickly, but how do we deploy them into production at scale in a way that we have the confidence that they provide, that they're being done securely, and that we've got the oversight needed to feel comfortable about doing it at scale? And so that's really where we're going to look today. But where does this all stem from? Really where this all stems from is from the desire for organizations to achieve hyperautomation. And hyperautomation is a term that's been around for a little while. I think it started from some of the analysts. And this is the definition of hyperautomation, right? Hyperautomation is a business-driven, disciplined approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, vet, and automate as many business and IT processes as possible. That's the holy grail to being able to deliver value more quickly. And so looking at it from that perspective, how do we achieve hyperautomation? And when we do that, we really look at it from ServiceNow's perspective as there's a core technology that's needed. We call it the digital enterprise. But then also on top of that, there are other technologies that organizations need to invest in to ultimately deliver on that hyperautomation vision, whether that be process mining, robotic process optimization, orchestration, integrations, artificial intelligence, or process automation. And all of those technologies come together to be able to achieve that hyperautomation vision. But as you do that, the environment gets more complex, and you need to be able to have more comfortability and more insight into what's going on. So today, again, we're going to really focus on the digital enterprise and what is the core of a low-code application development governance model, and what does that look like? And just as an example, I know a lot of you have been on some of our previous tech talks where we've talked about lots of different applications and how to build those applications. This is just an example of some applications that folks have built in the federal space to give some people some ideas of, hey, what are the different types of applications that people are looking to deliver on the ServiceNow platform? And these will be in the slides, in the recording. But when we look at development on a low-code platform and on ServiceNow, really what we're looking at is, since ServiceNow is a fundamental platform, you have all of the capabilities of that platform to be able to use at your disposal for when you're building your applications. And you can see some of the stuff down at the bottom, whether that be delivering through various experiences, web, mobile, chatbots, text and messaging, or reusing existing out-of-the-box capabilities through process automation or some of the intelligence components that are part of the platform. What we do is we provide you development tools and governance tools to be able to take the platform and build your applications at scale on top of it, and being able to do that through a combination of different creators within your organization. So today, we're really going to focus on that top white box, App Engine Management Center, which is the tooling that we are looking at to provide governance. And we're going to go through and talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then also show some demonstration of the App Engine Management Center and how it provides a starting point for an organization to build a governance model around. And I see some questions popping up in the chat. We'll take a look at the questions as we get closer to the end. So when we look at application governance, we first have to look at how do people use the ServiceNow platform in a low-code development approach. And really, we see three primary models that people use ServiceNow from a low-code perspective. The first one is it's another tool in the IT development toolbox. Maybe you have some C# developers, Java developers, web developers, whatever else it might be, and you want to add low code as another tool in the development toolbox to be able to tackle applications in a different approach than you have historically. That is a great use, and a lot of people, a lot of organizations start that way with low code development. Maybe you've been successful in that, and now you're looking at, hey, how do I use low code to be able to allow more distributed groups throughout my organization to be able to build low code applications? We kind of talk about that as distributed development. And so maybe you've been using it as an IT tool for a while, but you want mission units or business units that are distributed throughout your organization to be able to build their own applications. And an IT wants to be able to have insight into that and to be able to make sure that those organizations are living within the rules and the guide rails that you've put in place. And then the third one is maybe your organization is going all the way into a citizen development model where you want to open up a low-code platform for anyone or the majority of an organization to be able to build applications upon. And again, in that model, having a governance model and having tooling to be able to monitor and manage all of those applications is absolutely critical. But governance tools are important in all three of these different scenarios. Just how they apply might be slightly different. So regardless of which one of these three your organization might fall into, what we're going to talk about today is very relevant to that. And so that brings us to this. This is a software development lifecycle. We did not come up with this. This model has existed since software was first started being built. Every piece of software ultimately starts with an idea and ends with a system being retired, or hopefully the system is retired, when it's outlived its usefulness. And in the middle, right, you build, validate, deploy, maintain, monitor, and then ultimately retire. And there's iteration on that application. You're adding features, you're doing bug fixes, whatever else it might be. This is the life cycle of software in general. And at the end of the day, when we talk about low code, we're still talking about building software. We're still talking about building software applications. So just like a Java application might go through this process with a traditional DevOps pipeline and all the stuff that goes with that, A low-code application goes through this process as well. And how it goes through that process has a lot of similarities with, a traditional development, but it has some differences as well. But at the end of the day, you still want tooling that can help you in these different phases. And that's really what we're going to look at today. So we're going to look at low-code development all the way from ideation and intake, all the way through retirement of applications, and look at the tooling that we've put in place as part of our App Engine Management Center product that will allow you to get insight and tooling that supports every step in this process in your low-code development lifecycle. And so with that, we're going to look at it from the perspective of App Engine Management Center, again, which is some of the tooling that we've built to be able to provide the starting point and the foundation for you to build your governance process around around low-code development in your organization. And so what we're going to do is we're going to jump right in and we're going to look at it and we're going to start with intake. And so intake is the where everything starts. Hey, everything starts with an idea, and how do you collect those ideas? And this is probably the area that differs the most depending on how you're using low code in your environment, and who is providing those ideas. And so we're going to look and show you some capabilities that come out of the box. And then, you can look at it from your perspective and figure out how it applies to your organization. But Daniel, we're going to take a look at it now. Is what do we have out of the box when it comes to intake? How can people use App Engine Management Center to manage the idea intake process for low-code apps in their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Chris was saying, a lot of these different phases, we have different kind of out-of-the-box solution tooling that can be configured to your own process. And probably one of those things that you definitely can configure is this application intake form, which comes as a catalog item that's installed with App Engine Management Center. So I'm going to jump over, and everything that I'm going to demo today is going to be just what comes out of the box with App Engine Management Center. And then as I'm going through, I'll make sure to highlight, hey, here are these things that you definitely would want to configure in your environment, but we at least provide a starting point. So right now I'm logged into the Employee Center. As an employee, Jimmy is who I'm impersonating right now. And Jimmy is someone that hasn't done development on ServiceNow before, but is going to apply for what we're going to call citizen development for this request. So here's our catalog item that comes out of the box. Jimmy's going to fill out this catalog item. I'll skip over some of these things here, but you can see we've provided a starting point for different questions you might want to ask someone that wants to build an app for the first time on the platform. So is the process repeatable, email Excel-based processes, how many users are involved? Maybe whether or not it has sensitive/PII data might change the way that you go about the approval process, and some other information like that. But as it is, I'm just going to submit this request. So now Jimmy has submitted this request, and I'm going to jump into actual App Engine Management Center. So now I'm going to be acting as the App Engine Administrator. And as the App Engine Administrator, I use this tool called App Engine Management Center as kind of my central hub for managing development that's happening in my instance. So we can see from the home page here, the overview, we have lots of different kind of metrics that are popped up here to bring them to my attention first and foremost. But I'm going to jump into requests. And this is where I see 3 different types of requests that can come in: intake, collaboration, and deployment. So that first one that was just submitted by Jimmy, that time off request we see, I can open up that request. And now within your process, you might have any given number of parameters that you would have in place to approve this request. But the, based off of whoever the user is, maybe what department they're a part of, you can have your own kind of review process. But ultimately what you can do is use App Engine Management Center to actually approve this request. And a key thing to do when you're approving the request is to make sure you're giving the user the right permissions based off what they're asking to do. So I'm going to scroll down here and you see we have 4 different options out of the box. I can approve Jimmy to create/edit applications. I can say I only want him to be able to edit specific applications. I can just, maybe I'm just using this request to document the intake process, but I'm going to manually configure permissions myself. Or I could just not give the requester permission at all. So what we're going to do is give Jimmy the ability to create and edit applications. Then I'll go in and mark that catalog task complete. And I can come back to Jimmy's initial request here. And now that I've completed that permission selection, I'm able to approve his request. And there we go. So now we have a documented intake process. Jimmy, we captured information about what he's looking to do. We've approved his request. And we've actually done some automation on the back end, but I'm going to get into that in the next section. So we'll jump back over to the software development lifecycle.
Yeah, so if you look at intake, right, I mean, obviously that scenario there, we showed more of a citizen development model, right, where maybe you've got, or a distributed development model, where you've got somebody maybe outside of IT who has an idea for a application that they want to see built on the platform. They're able to submit that idea. It's able to go through a review process and either get approved or rejected. In the government space, maybe the group doing that review is a architecture review board, or it's some sort of cab that's looking at those requests and determining whether or not that's a good fit to be built on ServiceNow, whether or not it's an application that already exists, and then also what the path forward might that be. But it gives you a little bit of a process to be able to follow, or if you've already got another process that you use for demand management, you can just use that process and integrate that with ServiceNow as well. But that's just looking at it from that perspective. If you're not using it for citizen development and you're using it for a different model, that intake request still might be useful for you, but you might tweak what some of the questions on there are and how exactly it's used. But it gives you the foundation to be able to do a light demand management. But moving on from there, right after an idea is in the system, it all comes down to, hey, now you need to build something. And when we look at building, we talk about App Engine Studio. And so with App Engine Studio, you've got the ability to be able to do the building and either start with templates, start with some of the out-of-the-box guidance, collaboration, and this is the development tool that we would be using for building. We're not going to spend a lot of time with App Engine Studio today. We've talked about that in some of our previous webinars that we can go back in and get links for. But Daniel, after that intake form kind of came in, how does Jimmy get access to the tools that he needs to be able to build something?
Yeah, so one of the benefits, App Engine Management Center out of the box, once a user is approved based off of that intake form, they're automatically added to the App Engine users group and receive this email. You can see an example of an email on the right-hand side here with a link for them to be able to open up App Engine Studio in the dev instance. So in the instance that you've configured to be your dev environment within your pipeline is what this link will do. So it's actually provisioning those user permissions in the dev environment. So Jimmy, he's probably never even used your dev instance before, but now we've automatically provisioned him there. So at the top of my screen, if you see the different tab groupings, I'm going to jump over into the dev instance that I have here in my pipeline. And I'm going to go ahead and impersonate Jimmy Hardgrove. And if he clicked that link in the email, it would automatically open up App Engine Studio for him. We're just going to do things the manual way. And I will highlight here that, of course, development is still happening in the dev instance. So this hasn't given Jimmy any additional access. It hasn't edited his permissions at all in the production instance by default here. We're just giving him permissions in the dev instance. Now Jimmy's logging into App Engine Studio. And because we gave him that create app capability, he has this create app button. I can put in my time off request app. And like Chris mentioned, this is App Engine Studio. We're not going to really spend any time talking about App Engine Studio, the tool, but just wanted to show kind of that access provisioning that happens. And then maybe as Jimmy's developing this app, he realizes he needs some help in certain areas, maybe specifically in integration. Maybe this app has some sort of custom integration as part of it. So he's going to request a collaborator as part of this app. So he's going to pick one of his friends, we'll say Christopher Markham, to be a collaborator in this app. And instead of editor, he's going to make sure Christopher only has permission to do the thing that he is needed to do in this app. So we're going to make him an integration specialist. So Jimmy, just as my end user here, doesn't actually have the permissions to give Christopher the integration specialist role. But now he's submitted what's called a collaboration request. So I can jump back over into App Engine Management Center. And as the App Engine administrator, I receive that collaboration request that Jimmy just submitted. So I can open that up. We see it was submitted by Jimmy to invite Christopher in to collaborate on this app. So I'm going to go ahead and approve that. And again, just like we saw in that intake app, Christopher is now automatically receiving the appropriate permissions only to be able to edit that app in the specific way he is intended to edit that app. So we have a lot of granularity in the permissions that can be granted in that way. So I'm going to jump over here and hope that I didn't beat the automation and impersonate Christopher just to show you what that experience looks like for him. So he would have received an email that looked very similar to the one that Jimmy received when his initial request was approved. With a link to take him into App Engine Studio. So now as Christopher, I'm opening App Engine Studio. As expected, I don't have the ability to create an app, but I do see that time off request app that I was granted permission to. And importantly, within App Engine Studio, this ability to edit the experiences and the security of the app is locked down for me. I'm only able to add logic and automation. So we're able to get really granular with the collaboration permissions that are granted within App Engine Studio here.
No, that's really good. And I think that if we look at that, really, this is all about making it easier to scale development, right? A lot of the stuff you've been able to do for a while and be able to grant people permissions, be able to track collaboration requests, but it all would have been done manually through emails and spreadsheets and tracking it through that process. What we're trying to do here is give tooling that out of the box gives you the ability to manage these processes on the platform so that it's able to reduce the time and effort.
And I forgot to mention one thing to add there in terms of being able to configure it to your process. Those different levels of permissions that a collaborator will have within an app, those are editable and configurable as well. So you could create your own custom permission that says you're only allowed to edit data or only allowed to build a workspace, for instance, as part of an application. So that's able to be configured as well.
Yeah. Which is really powerful, especially as you open up the aperture as to who might be a collaborator in your environment. Being able to restrict people to just the permissions that you want them to have is critical. But if we move on from building and we get into validate and then deploy and maintain, this is, I think, where it gets really interesting from an automation perspective, right? Because at this point, it's, hey, you know, Jimmy's done building his application. He submitted that application and he said, hey, I'm done with this. And now you want it to move from your dev environment to your test environment, run some testing, and to be able to ultimately get approved and then move to your production environment. Historically, a lot of people would have done that manually with update sets. In your dev environment, you would have exported your update set, you would have moved that over to your test environment, you would have uploaded that, gone through the process, and then repeated it moving into production. Some of you have probably moved on to App Repo, which does provide some ability to streamline that process. But what we're going to look at today with App Engine Management Center is a tool called pipelines. And it's the ability to build a CI and CD pipeline within ServiceNow that allows you to fully automate the process of moving an application between dev and test, and then test and prod, or however many environments that you might, or however many instances you might have in your ultimate pipeline. So Daniel, what does that look like?
Yeah, so pipelines being configurable, what we're going to go through today, we have a dev instance, a test instance, and a prod instance. And we'll show an example of deploying that app that we just created live right now, deploying it from my dev instance into test and then into prod. So I'm going to jump back over to my dev instance and impersonate Jimmy again. Jimmy, again, if you're losing track of the names, was the person that just initially submitted this the intake request and created the app himself. And I impersonated the wrong Jimmy. Jimmy Hardgrove. So Jimmy Hardgrove submitted that request, created the time off request app. We had Christopher come in and collaborate. So now Jimmy comes in, and of course we imagine this is all populated and filled out with information. And so Jimmy's able to click the submit button here. Now you can see we have a pop-up here that shows Jimmy what he can expect from his IT team, maybe the App Engine administrator and or platform team as part of this review process. But he's able to click submit. Come down here and he's required to enter very detailed and helpful release notes, which you'll have to imagine for this demo. We see the version numbers automatically iterating here. So our first time deploying this app. So from Jimmy's perspective, he's done his job. He built the app and submitted it for review. Now, if you're catching on to the trend of the demo so far, you might be able to guess where I'm going to go next. Back into App Engine Management Center, and Jimmy submitting that request to deploy the app is visible to me here as the App Engine administrator. I'm able to open up that deployment request. And here I see a lot of information about the app that was built. I can, of course, actually open up the app that is requested to deploy here in the dev instance and review it manually myself. And any kind of automations or review process that we want to add into this can be configured. But as it is, I'm going to click approve here. And in approving that deployment request, a lot of automation is happening. And so I think the best way to describe that is actually using this slide here, which looks very complicated and complex the first time you're looking at it, but I think we can make it make sense fairly quickly here. So the three gray boxes on the top are three dev instances that we're going to go through today, the dev, test, and prod instances. Below that, we have App Engine Management Center. If you've been paying very keen attention, you may have noticed App Engine Management Center is running in my production instance. but we're using it as a control center across all 3 of my instances. So that's represented by the purple box there. And then the app repo, which we haven't actually seen yet on the screen, the app repo is hosted by ServiceNow and sits underneath all of these instances. So the actual process, what's happened here, we've used App Engine Studio as our tool to build this app. We could have also, used Legacy Studio or Dev Studio, or just the Next Experience UI, or a combination of all 3 of those things to construct the app. But from App Engine Studio, we submitted that deployment request. One thing that will automatically happen if you did have your App Engine Studio connected to source control, it would automatically commit whatever those latest changes were, or an initial commit potentially, to your Git repository. So we're highlighting that over here, that would have happened if we had connected to source control. But as it is, that deployment request was submitted in App Engine Management Center. It also published that app to app repo. So we captured that first version of the time off request app was published into the application repository. Then I logged in as the App Engine admin and approved this deployment request for that app to be published or to be installed in my test instance. So that's all the way through this blue line here. That app, the time off request, as it was published into the app repo, was installed into the test instance. And we're still not even done with all of the automation that just happened when I clicked that approve button. Because next, if you're familiar with the ATF or Automated Testing Framework or Instance Scan, we won't go into too much detail about what those things can do today. But just as an example, maybe every one of my custom apps that are deployed across my instances, I want to just check to see maybe was there any custom script written as part of this app, or are there any external integrations as part of this app, or maybe I'm testing a new user role that was granted and does it grant users permissions that I'm not comfortable with. We can build different instance scans to check for all of those things automatically. That way we don't have to do a kind of manual review process of every app that comes through, at least for those specific things. So when I approved that deployment request, installed the app in the test instance, and ran ATF and instance scan as we've configured it to run against that application. So I'll jump back over here into App Engine Management Center. And I'll show after having approved that request, I can click on this deployment environment results. And in our example here, we just ran a single instance scan, which you can see returned as has error, false, which also means it did not have an error, which is a good thing. So we had one single successful test run against that time off request deployment. And I'll actually jump into my test instance here. This is my test instance. And come over to installed here. Refresh this just to show you that that app did actually install in the test instance. So we're up into the second instance of the chain here. Wait for that refresh to stop. There it is. Time off request installed today. And importantly, uploaded by the AEMC pipeline user. So our service account actually moving that app from the app repo into the test instance. So jumping back into my diagram over here, the last piece would actually be deploying it from test or deploying it into prod. So once I approved that deployment request to move into test, a new deployment request was automatically created to move that same app into prod. And of course, we're not actually moving it from test to prod, but we're just going to be installing the app into our production instance from the app repo. Just making sure that's clear. That exactly the app that was installed into the test instance is now going to be installed into the production instance. So I want to jump over into the pipeline view of App Engine Management Center. Here are 3 different instances, and I can expand and collapse them to show the different apps that have been requested to be deployed across them. So right now it looks like we have one other request, one other app requested to be deployed from dev into test. And here we see our time off request as well as a few others that are currently in test requested to be deployed into prod. So just another way of kind of visualizing and navigating to these requests. So I'm going to go ahead and approve that one. And that's our final step. And again, this is very configurable if you have different types of pipelines or different types of approval processes to go through as part of these deployment approvals. That can be configured, but this is just what I've showed out of the box is how that app ultimately goes from app repo into the production instance to where the users can start using it.
No, that's great. And I think if we look at that holistically, right, if we look at how things exist today or existed in the past with update sets and being able to manually move files and get them over, there's a lot of room for potential error. There's a lot of room for things getting lost. There's room for things getting moved and maybe they didn't go through the approval process. There's all sorts of exception cases in that model. So by being able to put a pipeline around your applications and being able to have a lot more control over what moves, it just gives you that better insight and control and just comfortability that you know exactly what's going on in between your environments and you know exactly what's going into production because you've got all of the traceability of all the applications that have moved through all of the steps. All right, so now that we kind of talked about, hey, how do you start with an idea? How do you build an application? How do you validate it and deploy it and maintain it? And you can imagine this might iterate a lot of times. Now that that application makes it into production, Jimmy might go back and do version 1.2 and 1.3 and to be able to push those through and you'd get all of that traceability and all of that history that goes with that and be able to see exactly what happened. But now that that application's in production, now we need to monitor it. And this is where, a lot of times organizations have the least insight into is, hey, now I've got a bunch of applications in production. What's going on with them, right? Hey, when we built this application, when the CAB approved this application, the request said, hey, this application is going to be used by 5,000 people every day, tens of thousands of transactions. It's going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And it makes it into production. Is it really being used like that? How do you know? Or vice versa, you've got an application that Jimmy built to help him out, maybe a personal productivity app that got approved to go into production, but maybe it's actually being used by a lot more people than you originally thought. Again, how do you know that? And then it also takes us into retirement. How do you know when applications are ready to be retired from a metrics perspective? How are you able to track that? And so that's kind of the last piece of some of the tooling that we have provided is looking at how do you monitor applications in production and get the metrics, and then ultimately, how do you use those to determine if something is ready to be retired or needs to be kept around? So Daniel, from that perspective, once the app's in production, what do they get?
Yeah, so a few things that we'll show, app and developer monitoring, kind of providing a comprehensive holistic view of all of the apps and developers that are developing custom apps in your instance, as well as the actual usage of those apps that have been deployed, as Chris was mentioning. So I'm going to jump back over into App Engine Management Center. And as the App Engine admin, I have visibility into all of those things. And again, I do want to call your attention to these 5 different kind of tabs that we have at the top here. So overview page, this is that first one that kind of shows some high level information. Requests, that is where we approved any of the 3 intake, collaboration, or deployment requests. Pipelines, that showed that series of environments that the app went through. But to what Chris was just talking about, our custom apps page here, this is our one-stop shop to see all of the scoped applications that have gone through this process across any of our instances. So you can see some high-level metrics here with some information showing how they've changed over time. We can also look at different apps by department. So maybe if you're in full-fledged citizen development mode, interesting to see which departments are developing and ultimately deploying the most applications. And then we can also scroll down here, and this is just an actual list of all of the apps that are existing at any point in our pipeline here. So of course, and the most recent one being that one that we just deployed and is installed in our production instance, that time off request. So it's really nice to have this kind of one-stop shop location to see all of your custom apps. And I'll jump into that time off request just to show some information available within here. So we literally just deployed this app. So as expected, we're seeing zeros, but we would be seeing the number of users that have accessed the application, the number of records that have been inserted, the number of updates that have happened to that underlying data, any user experience analytics dashboards that we have associated with this application. So we're able to, as Chris was mentioning, monitor how often that application is being used and be able to make informed decisions about maybe migration, folding it into another app, or just retiring it if that's the appropriate decision. We've only had one version of this app deployed, but we can see the deployment history, all the different versions that have been pushed through the pipeline. And conveniently, we can see the actual collaborators that contributed to this app, Jimmy Hardgrove being the owner, and then we also, as we saw, Christopher came in and acted as that integration specialist. And so speaking of developers, I'll hop into the last tab here, the developers tab. And then, so this is similar to looking at the custom apps, but we want to look from a developer perspective. All of the 96 developers that I have in my instance here, how many are active, changes, what departments those developers might sit in. And then I can come through on a person-by-person basis and actually look at the apps that each person has contributed to. So I'll jump in, let me go to Jimmy's. Let's pick a random one. Sydney Carter. So here we would see listed any apps that Sydney Carter had worked on or helped with. Here we go. So we can see Sydney Carter is one of our, she's in the IT department and is one of our one of our developers that has contributed the most to this program. So she's developed 7 different apps. We can see all the different intake requests that Sydney has submitted, the collaboration requests that Sydney has submitted, and then of course, ultimately the actual deployment requests. So it can just be useful to look at a person-by-person view of how they're contributing and how they're taking part in development across my instance. So we worked through really all those 5 pieces of App Engine Management Center. The first being the overview tab, requests here, intake. We talked about the very first portion of that software development lifecycle. Then we showed building in App Engine Studio, what that looks like, and submitting a collaboration request, again, managed in App Engine Management Center. And then ultimately deploying that application, going through some of those automatic testing. What we did today was just it was kind of a dummy test of an instance scan, but just to show an example of how some of those app tests can be done in an automatic fashion. And then ultimately deployed across our environments. And just to keep me honest here, I'll go into the, this is in my production instance, and refresh this and show that that time off request app that we all saw, well, we all created here live together during the event, actually is installed in my production instance here, installed today. So all that automation worked. We successfully installed that app into production. And then we showed how we're able to monitor all of the apps that we've deployed and then ultimately retire them if we so choose.
Yeah, I think this has been really great, right? We've looked at the software development lifecycle, all the way from intake to retirement, and some of the tooling that App Engine Management Center provides you out of the box to be able to address each of those phases. Now, exactly how you use these tools inside of your overall organization's governance process might be a little bit different, might be a little bit unique. But the tooling gives you a starting point and information and data to be able to use as part of your governance process. And as you can imagine, from a ServiceNow perspective, everything in the ServiceNow system is very configurable and able to be tweaked exactly to how you want to use it. All of these tools can be used as a starting point. And if you need to make changes to what the intake looks like or how exactly deployment requests go through the system, and maybe you have some automatic approvals versus manual approvals based off of different data, you're able to do that. You're able to tailor all of these tools and all these processes to your needs. Just think of this as a starting point that we're going to continue to grow and expand from here. App Engine Management Center is a relatively new capability that started out in San Diego and has been enhanced in Tokyo and Utah, with further enhancements in Vancouver and the future releases to come. So this is really just the beginning and the starting point of all of the governance and management capabilities that we intend to provide on the platform to help you scale your development across your organization. And from that perspective, I think, from a presentation perspective, I think we're done. We have a few minutes left. If there's any questions in the Q&A, or if anyone has any questions, we'll try and take a look at that and address any of those.
Oh, and I saw the question. We are ServiceNow here, not a third party doing this presentation. So Chris and I work in federal creator workflows for ServiceNow.
So there was a question that came in about App Engine Management Center requests tied to some of the ITSM capabilities. So that's actually something we didn't address today. However, it's a great question. So when we look at the deployment requests, for example, there's some enhancements going on in deployment requests around how it integrates into a broader change management and CMDB system. And so there's some of the capability that exists today and some of the capability that's still coming, but you're able to link deployment requests into your broader change management system. And then you're also able to have applications, as they go through the deployment pipelines, automatically be published into your CMDB as applications as well, so that they're part of your overall CMDB from that perspective. There's another question that just came in. How many? Is the question how many federal agencies are using the citizen development model? Whoever put that in can just add a little bit more detail to that question. I'll start to answer the question, assuming that's what the question is. Okay, so when we look at the different development models from a federal perspective, App Engine is in the vast majority of federal agencies that have ServiceNow, and they're using it for either extending out-of-the-box applications or doing some level of tailored development. A lot of organizations are doing distributed development, so they're doing development from a perspective of central IT, but also allowing different organizations, maybe distributed organizations or different bureaus, to be able to do development. And then there are some that have moved more into a citizen development model. Quite frankly, citizen development is not widespread throughout the federal government as of yet. But distributed development is actually pretty common. And so I think the next question that just came in, if I saw it pop up right, is How common is it to have non-IT development folks creating production applications? And again, that's going to vary widely by organization. Some organizations do it quite a bit. Other organizations don't do it at all. And so there is a large gap there. I will say though that we are starting to see a trend where it's not necessarily again all the way to citizen development, where maybe a non-IT, like maybe a business user is building the entire application themselves. We do see some of that, but we are seeing more involvement from the business or the mission, where they are collaborating with IT and applications in new and unique ways compared to how they've done it in the past. So Daniel earlier showed the whole collaboration request, where you're able to invite people into an application development process, but do it with very controlled permissions. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about with customers, and we actually just saw this with a customer a couple of weeks ago, where they're having more and more people outside of the traditional development teams, whether they be business analysts or power users or whatever else it might be invited in to be able to do things like build screens, build reports, build dashboards, to be able to build the components, because they're the closer to the actual business and the mission need. And you can bring them in and let them do those tasks, maybe without allowing them to change the data model. And so there's new and unique ways that we're finding people use these capabilities to kind of grow who can contribute to applications, even in organizations that aren't moving all the way to a pure citizen development model.
Yeah, and to echo that, one thing I've seen with a few of my customers are starting to get requests from mission groups who have maybe an embedded partner, an embedded contractor that they've worked with historically, that also happen to have a professional ServiceNow development resources. So they have professional ServiceNow developers. Mission comes to IT and says, "Hey, can we build an app on your instance?" And the platform team is thinking, "Well, we don't have extra resources to expend on that app. But if you're bringing the resources, how can we say yes to that request?" So that's just another example of like a non-IT, quote unquote, non-IT developer, but it still could even be a professional ServiceNow developer developing production apps in your instance. And these are some of the tools that kind of help you say yes to those types of requests if you want.
Yeah, and so the question just came in, can we govern changes like configuration and properties using App Engine Management Center? So the short answer is App Engine Management Center is really focused around scoped applications. So anything that is deployed as part of a scoped application can fall within this process and be managed by that. And so, if you're making configuration options to a screen or to a report or to a table, and you're bundling that together as part of that scoped application, then yes. But today it's not going to manage, I'll say, data changes within a table or within a system property or something along those lines. There are other ways to be able to kind of go down that path, and happy to talk, if you reach out, happy to talk with you offline about that. So I think with that, we're about out of time. So Clarissa, I'll turn it back over to you to kind of wrap us up.
Great, thank you, Chris. I'd like to thank all our participants as well as our speakers for being with us today. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful.